Hello and welcome to this chess guess video. I apologize for the giant display of my image, but I wanted to cover up the moves. That way you can try and guess the moves as we go along. And this game features Garry Kasparov, one of the greatest chess players in history. And this is played in the 1999 Linares, Spain tournament when I believe Garry Kasparov had his highest rating at that time, 2,851, and he's playing against Vasily Ivanchuk, who had around a 2,700 rating at the time. So this should be a good game. And Kasparov was known to crush people with the Sicilian defense. So let's see how this game turns out, and you can guess the moves as we go. So Ivanchuk, he begins with e4. And I believe he was an attacking player as well, just like Kasparov. So we should be in for an aggressive attacking game. And Kasparov begins, of course, with the Sicilian defense here, c5. Now, the Sicilian defense is one of the best ways, maybe the best way to counterattack against the e4 pawn push here. You just counterattack with the flank pawn, discouraging your opponent from pushing this pawn immediately because you could just capture. And then if the queen would recapture, you could develop the knight with tempo by attacking that queen. All right, so the game continues with knight to f3 by Ivanchuk, helping control the center, but to get ready to push this pawn up here to d4 where it'll be backed up by the knight. So what does Kasparov do next? Let's take a look, see if you can guess. In the Sicilian, there are many possible moves that could be played here. You could play pawn to a6. One of the most common moves is knight to c6, or even pawn to d6 here. You could even fianchetto the bishop early. So what does Kasparov do? He plays this common d6 move, which unleashes the bishop. It helps fortify the center. That way if this pawn tries to push forward, you can capture, which could be important if you want to bring this knight up to f6. So the game continues with d4, one of the most common moves, maybe the most common move in the Sicilian, the open Sicilian now. So normally black, if I give away the answer here, but pause if you want to think, especially for beginners out there. But normally black will just capture here and then white will recapture. And of course that is what Kasparov and Ivanchuk do in the continuation. And now what should be played next? What will Kasparov do? Well, a common move is to immediately attack this unprotected pawn here with the knight. And that is what Kasparov does. What do you think Ivanchuk will do? Well, a normal continuation might be to defend that pawn while developing the knight. So that is played. And now here there are different options. You could bring the knight up. You could push this pawn. You could start fianchettoing. You could play the a6 pawn push for the Najdorf variation. And let's see what Kasparov does. He does play the Najdorf variation, and this keeps pieces out of this b5 square. Both of these knights, keeps them out of there. The bishop is prevented from moving there with check on the king. So Ivanchuk continues with bishop to e3, the English attack here. Now, this is a good attacking move. It develops the bishop. Perhaps in the future, the queen can move and Ivanchuk could castle queenside. But let's see how the game continues. And what will Kasparov do here? Well, He could maybe attack by developing his knight, attacking Ivanchuk's knight in the center. He could push this pawn and attack the knight, but that would leave a pretty big hole here on d5. He could just play pawn to e6. Let's see what he does. He pushes forward, attacking the bishop here. And of course, the knight is protected by Kasparov's bishop, so the queen can't take it. And now, to keep the bishop pair, what will Ivanchuk do? He develops lining up on the queen. So Kasparov plays the next move here. And what do you think he will do? How should Kasparov proceed? Well, he goes ahead and immediately attacks that bishop, as Kasparov is known as a great attacking player. So immediately he forces that bishop to retreat. The bishop steps back, and now what should Kasparov do? Well, if you guess the move of g5, continuing to attack that bishop, and now the bishop probably should retreat. And that's what Ivanchuk does. He just retreats back. And now what should Kasparov do next? Well, if you guessed it, bishop to g7, good job. Because he's already pushed these pawns, so now he has a fianchettoed bishop aiming down through the center all the way towards the rook on the queen side. The king is ready to castle. Although he has opened things up a little bit here by pushing this pawn, there might be a possibility of a counterattack here. So let's see what happens. The queen is developed, and now Ivanchuk is ready to castle queenside. So how does Kasparov respond? Well, he holds back on castling for the moment, deciding to immediately attack this knight in the center. So he has two attackers now with only one defender. So Ivanchuk, how does he take care of this problem? He just drops his knight back. And we're in book moves here all the way to, move number 11. So it just shows that there's a lot of theory in the Sicilian defense, and that might be why it's tougher with all these great computer programs. It's really tough to play these tactical and difficult openings these days, because if you have a well-prepared opponent that could be lower rated than you, if he's really studied up on the opening with the help of a computer, it can give you problems, even if you're higher rated than them. All right, so what does Kasparov do next? He centralizes the knight here, and now there's a threat maybe of jumping forward. Well, not at the moment, because the bishop is covering that. But maybe the knight is planning on jumping back here to fortify the king side and to prevent a pawn push, or slow that down anyway. So the game continues with pawn to f3, fortifying the central pawn. And now what does Kasparov do next? Well, he immediately starts pushing on the queen side here, because it's pretty likely that Ivanchuk will castle over to the queen side. And if Kasparov goes to the king side and we have opposite side castling, well, then it becomes a race, a pawn storm race. Whoever can push their pawns and break through first. So the game continues with Ivanchuk stepping back here. Maybe taking this diagonal, perhaps preventing the queen from developing up here. But most likely the queen will go to c7. Let's see what Kasparov does. He decides to play rook to b8, and now he can push this pawn forward and it'll really be protected quite well by not only the knight, but the rook as well. So the game continues with knight centralizing, and this is the first inaccuracy of the game, it looks like. And at this point, it looks like Kasparov has a slight edge here. The computer recommends h4. So let's see how things continue. Will Kasparov exchange material? Taking the knight. Let's see. No, he attacks immediately, putting pressure on this knight, attacking it, forcing Ivanchuk to move that knight. Or he could go ahead and exchange off material here. Let's see what happens. He retreats the knight, and now he's blocked. He can't even castle queenside, but I don't know if you'd want to do that with these pawns already way up the board here. So Kasparov captures, bishop recaptures, lining up on the unprotected bishop here. So what does Kasparov do? He ignores that and just attacks immediately in the center, trying to open things up because Ivanchuk's king is kind of stuck in the center, whereas Kasparov could castle quickly if he needs to. So we have capture, and this is a mistake. Apparently bishop to f2 would have been better, dropping the bishop back. So the game continues with queen captures. Now we have a pawn pushing forward here. And what should Kasparov do? Well, if you guessed that he ignores what's happening here and castles his king, it looks like this was probably the best move. And Kasparov has a pretty good edge here. So let's see how he takes advantage of it. We have developing of the bishop by Ivanchuk. Kasparov doubles up rook and queen on the open D file. And now this bishop is really pinned here, so that could be quite dangerous. Queen gets out of the line of fire. And now we have bishop developing. The rooks are connected. What does Ivanchuk do next? Well, he doesn't castle. He tries to get his knight back in the game, and now he still has that possibility of castling queenside, perhaps. So we have a capture, bishop captures, and now the queen drops back, lining up on this unprotected queen, also perhaps getting out of the line of fire if the rook comes over to the center. So no castling for Ivanchuk, and apparently that's the best move, is to slide that king over there without castling. Interesting choice. And at this point, it looks like black still has an edge. So bishop centralizes, and this is the first mistake by Kasparov. So apparently rook at b to c8, lining the rook up on the other open file is preferred by the computer. So the game continues with the pawn pressing forward, and this is a mistake. It does free up the rook from guard duty on that a2 pawn, but what does Kasparov do to take advantage of this? He brings the rook towards the center, lining up on the bishop, and the game continues with rook centralizing. We have a brilliant move played by Kasparov here. So, no problem if you didn't find that move, but Ivanchuk will most likely capture. He does. That's the best move. But now this bishop is lined up on the queen. So what do you think Kasparov will do next? Well, he brings the knight forward, unleashing a discovered attack on the queen. The queen finds the best move, counterattacking over here. And if you found this move, awesome job. The knight forks the king and rook, and it's check, so it doesn't give the queen time to capture here. So king moves, and now we have rook grabbing the open file. Ivanchuk probably has to take care of this unprotected, well, not unprotected, but this attack on his rook. So queen, take a look at that again. Queen captures the pawn with an attack on Kasparov's queen. So now we have that being ignored in favor of this capture, but apparently rook to c6 would have been even better, attacking the queen. So after the trade of queens, we now have Kasparov ahead, or is he ahead in material? Let's count things up. Actually, Ivanchuk is ahead by 1 pawn. Now, Kasparov does have the bishop pair, which can be quite dangerous. So the game continues with rook to c1. And this is a mistake. But at this point, it looks like Ivanchuk resigned. Now, even though this is a mistake, Kasparov is still winning. So let's take a look at the best move. Apparently is rook to d8, attacking the bishop that way. But this at least pins the bishop. So let's see how the game could have continued. It looks like at this point the best move would be g3 because there's a threat of pinning that knight to the king by the dark squared bishop, and that knight is the only thing protecting this bishop here. So now what is recommended? Oh wow, bishop to h3 is the best move apparently. Bishop to h3, knight takes h3, rook takes d1 check, king up to g2, rook to d2, king to f1, and rook to d1 or bishop to d4. So bishop to d4 really restricts the knight. You have an attack on this pawn. The third best move is to just go ahead and capture here. But that king is really trapped. You capture this pawn, then you could probably get behind here and capture the other pawn. So Ivanchuk decided not to play on and resigned. Now, if we look at the game review here, as far as how the players did, Ivanchuk played with 91.4% accuracy. I don't know if you can see that. Let me finally decrease the size of this crazy image here. Maybe I can find a better way in the future to cover up the moves instead of stretching, like making a giant picture like that of myself. All right, let me shrink that down some. I know you probably don't want to see, my face filling up half of the screen. So now you can see it looks like a 91.4% accuracy rating by Ivanchuk, which is pretty decent, but 94.2 by Kasparov. And the game was pretty even until the middle game and into the end game. Kasparov just took over. And he had that one brilliant move of giving up his rook, I think. It was this move. So he captures, giving up the exchange, the rook for a bishop, after the capture here. But it allowed this knight to do some damage with the discovered attack on the queen. Now, if we go back, it looks like one brilliant move by Kasparov, 5 great moves, and the bad moves, 3 inaccuracies and 2 mistakes by Ivanchuk, but 1 inaccuracy and 2 mistakes by Kasparov. And that's the thing with the Sicilian defense, especially the open Sicilian. There can be so many tactics on a wide open board like this. There was just a lot going on, and it's hard to play everything accurately with some wild tactics going on. And if you can't see on the bottom here, I'm covering that up, so I'll move my image. You can see that it looks like Ivanchuk played at a 2650 level, a little bit, about 50 points below his rating, but Kasparov played at a 2950 level in this game. All right, well, I hope you did well guessing those moves. If you'd like to see specific players where you can guess the moves in the future, feel free to leave a comment with a request. Like and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you for watching, and have a super chess day.